how much ground reaction force? When do I create force? There are two questions I get asked all the time. Steve, how much force do I need? When do I need to push through my feet? Force precedes motion. We create force through the ground. We get this equal and opposite reaction. It helps us move. It helps us tilt, turn and bend. Helps us deliver the golf club. So today I'm going to give you a video and I'm going to discuss with you, talk to you and show you from my system how much force players create for various shots in the golf swing. So we have a DP World Tour player here, one of the fastest on the DP World Tour, and we're going to have a look at his forces. So our first player, this DP World Tour player, hitting driver. Let me just talk you through the forces. So the numbers that I'm going to quote to you are values as a percentage of body weight. So if this player is 100 kilos in weight and is applying 25% as a percentage of force against his body weight into the ground, that would be 25 kilos, okay? So we're going to start with the medial lateral force, the force that helps you sway, move your body side to side, this way, as we see from the camera, and also the force that aids your ability to tilt and side tilt, essentially into the top of the backswing, but also, as we know, so important, into impact as your body is turning through. So we start off on the top right hand side. There's a couple of notable values. I call these kind of critical events in the golf swing. Firstly, there is a force that he is applying towards the target, which is going to help him shift away from the target. Now, every player on the planet shifts away from the target. Think about it. Your arms and club, which are 28% of your center of mass, they are moving away from the target. They are moving up and away from the ground. Everybody shifts. I'm yet to see a player, even if they are trying not to shift, they are shifting towards their trail side. So first of all, we like to see as the first critical event in the force kind of plots that we're seeing here in these graphs is the push towards the target, which is going to help him shift away from the target towards his trail side. So when we look at that value, I'm just going to bring this video through so we can see that value here. We're just going to move that in time. So as a percentage of force, there's around 3 to 4% as a percentage of force against his body weight in towards the target foot action and away from the target ground reaction. So that will essentially help him move the club and shift towards his trail side. We then actually just get to around just before top of backswing, just before to top of backswing. It's different between players, but this player in particular gets to a value of 25.8%, nearly 26%. That's a lot of force. As I said to you there, if this player weighed 100 kilos, that would be nearly 26 kilos of force away from the target, which is essentially going to shift him towards the target. Now we know that pelvis is shifting, rib cage is shifting. We need to get the arms and club moving forwards towards the target. So the ability to shift or sway is powered by that medial lateral force, that side to side force. It also begins to aid his ability to tilt and side tilt, which essentially we know that there is that trail side tilt moving into and post impact as the player is also turning through impact. So that gets to a value of nearly 26%. Now, the two next forces on the two plots here on the right hand side, the AP force, the heel to toe, toe to heel force, the force that aids your thrust ability, your turn ability, and your bend ability. So we have the trail foot. Now the two notable events here, critical events, are really essentially mid-downswing, and they peak at mid-downswing. Now your ability to turn towards the target is essentially the AP force. We know it gives you some thrust, we know it also gives you some bend ability, but it is mainly your ability to turn. So that turning torque is powered by over 18% by this player from the trail foot, a heel to toe action. He's pushing towards the heel. There is a toe reaction, which is going to move his trail side forwards. And then just about almost identical timings, there is a push towards the toe foot action and ground reaction towards the heel on his lead foot. This coupling effect will help him open up his pelvis, essentially rotate his pelvis, rotate his body. He is also going into that kind of bending motion as well as he goes into his downswing. Before then he replaces bend with side tilt going into impact. So our AP forces there, here, these two plots. Then the vertical force. For this player, he's north of 180. It's actually 180.37 here as a peak value of force. But what I will point out to you, because the ability to get heavy, which is then essentially going to help him rise or side tilt, also is dependent on how light he gets. So when we look at his lightest value here as an event, he's getting light by as much as 78%. Now I see tour players going below that. I see even long drivers south of 50%. I think the lowest I've seen is 40%. So essentially that free fall, that start down, just as you start down your downswing before everything kind of, you see everything on camera moving downwards or south, there is this ultimate acceleration down to the ground, a free fall in action, and this player is losing nearly 22% of his body weight. So he is just going and falling towards the ground. And then he begins to get heavy. So we know that there is a lower reaction as we begin to reflex or move back into flex in our downswing in various segments. But also we need to get heavy. We break, we get heavy, and then we rise into impact. So this player then creates over 180%, 1.8 times his body weight as a force value straight down into the ground if we're measuring vertical. And out of that, it's nearly 128% of that 180 comes from his lead foot. So we know that up to 70% can come from the lead side. And if it's more from the lead, less from the trail, that is going to be the lead side rising, the trail side lowering. There is your side tilt going into impact as your pelvis rises. Now, when the segments begin to rise, that will increase your ability to pull on the handle up, in and around the corner, and that will then allow the head to kick forwards, which means that you can get the head to peak its speed into impact. And that is what all of the fast players do the best, is rise and jump and pull up in and around and bend the hand path, not through the good old chicken wing that we see most amateurs do, actually from rotation and rise. And that is the best pull that you can get on the grip, the longest lever that you're going to get, that then kicks that head forwards and makes that head speed up going into impact. So that's what this player is doing essentially throughout his swing, those critical events of lateral forces, AP, toe, heel, toe forces, and then vertical forces. If we look at a sequence, there is a side to side in every body, there is a front to back in every body, There is a down to up in everybody in that order. And everybody's doing that. Now, the magnitude and the amounts obviously is very different between shots and players and their concept, what they believe they need to do or what they're even trying to do through their body. The force that they're getting, recruiting from the ground, essentially is helping them move their body above the ground. We've got 2 force points. We've got the ground and we've got the handle. If you're going to move above the ground, you want to use the ground to move away from it. So we're pushing and we're getting that equal and opposite reaction. So let's play this player. We're going to see his center of mass. I will sort of point out his traces going across, up, across and up again. So away from target, away from ground, towards target, down towards ground, and then up and away from ground. So that roller coaster, what all good players do, and the fastest do the most, okay, and the earliest, I might add, we have that trace. So let me play this so you can see this. I'm actually going to just dim the lights as well so you can see this here a little bit clearer. So just going to bring this back and play this video through. So if we look at this player here then, playing in slow-mo, look at the forces under his trail foot, then watch him get light, and then watch the forces shift and get heavy, and then watch him rise going up into impact. And we'll play this one again as we see these kind of forces in the graphs change. So we've got that initial push towards and the movement away. We've got some brakes being applied. We have then got that big push underneath the trail foot, which is essentially going to get him to move across. Then we've got the A piece kicking in, turning his body, allowing him to bend back into position. And then the vertical forces, which we will see on this third and final play of this video. So I'm just going to point to these vertical forces as we see. And essentially he's kind of getting light as he reaches just into early downswing, super heavy around midpoint of the downswing, and then feet almost off the ground at impact, and then getting heavy again post impact. Okay, so this next player, major winner, one of the best iron players that I've seen striking golf balls. So let's start with this player and effectively these force plots here. So I'm just going to pop the lights back on just so you can see me again. Drop that light there. So medial-lateral force, essentially that force that helps you move side to side and also the force that helps you tilt. So we've got this kind of these critical events, again, as I call them, importantly, the amount and the timings. Force precedes motion, okay? So those events are critical that they are at the right time because you will see motion on your camera as a result of that force, fact. So we've got a push towards to start the backswing, a push towards the target of just short of 7% as a percentage of body weight. We then see brakes applied at around P2. We then see the force grow to over 25% away from the target, which is essentially going to create that lateral that we see of his center of mass. We then look at the AP, toe to heel forces. The critical events here are that kind of mid-downswing counter or coupling effect of trail towards heel foot action, and then towards toe ground reaction, lead towards toe, foot action, and then away or towards heel reaction. So this coupling effect, imagine kind of turning or opening that bottle of soft drink that I've explained in previous videos. So this player gets to over 20% under his trail from heel to toe reaction, and then 30, just short of 31% in lead toe to heel. So we had that player nearly double in the first video, and then on this player we're seeing 1.5 times. So again, there is this commonality here of 1.5 to 2 times. I've seen over 2 times come from that lead foot, but essentially it's your lead foot that's opening up your pelvis. It's your lead foot that's tilting the lead side of your pelvis up. It's primarily your lead foot that is giving you the ability to rise, okay? That is the major power source here, like the nuclear power station. The biggest turbine of power is going to be your lead foot and the forces that you can create in that very, very short space of time, which is downswing, which is less than 3/100ths of a second. So we've got this kind of 20 over 30 there. So 1.5 times more under that lead foot to help him. And we can see that's happening quite late in the downswing for this player, more towards impact. Generally, I see it more towards mid downswing, but this player is essentially kind of creating most of his work going into impact and turning through it. So this is an iron shot, I might add. I do see timings much later in an iron shot, but in the fastest, most powerfulest players that are creating the fastest clubhead speeds, I'm seeing forces much, much earlier peak in the downswing, because force precedes motion. They can get their body to get into a bigger position, bigger movements, faster movements into impact, which essentially is allowing them to create faster speeds with the club head. So we move on to, last but not least, the vertical forces. So when we look at these critical events of getting light and getting heavy, as that peak vertical here. So I'm going to look at the light point here and just go through. We get as close as I can to that kind of light point there. Here we go, just bring that back. Yes, 75%. And I've just showed you there, as you can see, early downswing. He's unweighted 25%. He's in free fall, in pretty quick free fall, because 75% is pretty decent. Most club golfers, they're struggling to get anywhere near 80. I know I've seen players unweight as much as 40, but generally the fastest are getting lighter. But tour players is that kind of, we know that there is so many different shots that they're applying forces to, so they tend to kind of gravitate to this roughly kind of the same kind of generation of force for most of their shots, from iron to driver, as they're getting very consistent in their speed delivery. But we know the fastest are certainly getting much more, and the slowest are getting much less. The fastest are doing it much earlier, the slowest are doing it much later, okay? But we know tour players are very consistent in their force patterns and force profiles, and I know for a fact that this player is doing the same, similar force values with driver. Arguably, whether he was one of the fastest, this was, you know, a question that we was discussing a lot when I first met him, that he was wanting to create more speed. He wasn't unweighting as much, he wasn't creating as much vertical force as other players are, so we worked on that kind of vertical force value. So, he's unweighted 75 to 75, early downswing, and then when we get to that kind of peak of vertical force, he's around, I believe, here around, I can't stop it exactly, we will see it when we play through, about 160 as a combined vertical force value, 1.6 times. Now, obviously, we had 180 in the other player, and I've seen players well north of 200. So 180 there, sorry, 160 there, and we know the timings of it very late. Look at his heaviest point is actually past impacts. We're only going to see rise after that. So that means essentially he's kind of going down through impact, which is going to change the way the club is delivered. It certainly will affect the low point of the swing, potentially affecting attack angle as well. But this player was very good at hitting iron shots, okay? So a pattern that we could certainly start to apply for iron shots. But from a speed perspective, that was definitely affecting his speed generation, because we know that upward motion of the lead hip, the rise of the pelvis allows the hands to be bent up in and around, a pull, the correct kind of pull up and around, which then kicks the club head forwards, is all powered by that vertical force. So lead foot around 130, I can't quite get to the exact amount there, but we will see it when we play that through. Around 130 of that 160 is from his lead foot, and we know that that lead foot is the largest contributor to that total value of vertical force. We see the center of mass moving over towards the trail, not much rise, lots of lowering, quite long and low, kind of going down for a long period of time and then up post impact. So let's play this player through. I'm going to switch the lights again. And let's bring this one back here and play this swing from the beginning. Okay, so we see the forces as he shifts and breaks, pushes off the trail away from the target to shift towards target, force underneath the lead foot. You can see the legs stay flexed through impact and then an upward rise post impact. So we're seeing this medial-lateral motion here of off the left over to the trail, push away from the target, reaching peak now, and then the AP's peaking now, the vertical force is peaking now. So we're back in that sequence of lateral, AP anterior posterior toto heel force, and then vertical force. We're seeing the same. It happens the same in every good player. That sequence is the same, okay? Now, whether we have a bias to seeing players with greater amounts and lower amounts, I see everyone follow the same sequence in the best players. The lateral push to shift, the forces going forwards and backwards to turn and bend into position, and then the rise and the tilts from the vertical forces all happening in that order. So then we have world champion Martin Borgmeier. Very fortunate to do a lot of work with him and his coach, Lee Cox, a good friend of mine. Martin is a tremendous player and we've worked a lot on his vertical forces over the time that we've worked together. He was actually short of 200 and then we got him way above 200. So that rise and jump in action that he has coming into impact is essentially powered by his vertical force and very, very powerful motion. As I've explained earlier in the video of that inward, upward and around pull of the handle, motion of the hands that he's then able to kick that club head forwards and really get that injection of speed into the club head. So Martin very much, and we see this with all long drivers, there is quite a lot of medial lateral. So these critical events here, there's kind of a big wavy effect of his medial laterals. These long drivers, they're kind of priming, they're going side to side, and then they're kind of letting the club or hands go forwards, and then they're going over towards their trail, and then they go. They give that club a good whip and a good whoosh into the backswing. So essentially that shifting of the body, the momentum that they're creating in the body is then allowing them to really apply a ton of force to that handle, which is ultimately going to help them get the handle further, higher and around and create a bigger stretch that then they can ultimately then create speed from in their hands in the downswing. So lots of waves here, but we're going to look at this event here and his push underneath his lead foot towards the target to get a ground reaction and a shift in action away from the target. We move to this event here, and I would say that he was creating in order of around, 50%, maybe just short of that, as a force towards the target, half of his body weight as a force towards the target to help him move away from the target. Okay, done before the club has even moved. Okay, club still there, over here, ready to go, club still there. He's going to be braking underneath his trail foot before the club even moves. Now, this is what the fastest do the best. The amount is much higher than anyone else on the planet. The timing's much earlier. Now, when we see average golfers try and move the club faster, they have a problem. They create more force. We've got all these videos here on YouTube that help us kind of jump around and create more force. But nobody's talking about the critical events of timings of these forces. So we know that the fastest players and the most accurate players for sure are timing these forces at different intervals during the swing itself. So we've got that kind of push towards the target, the ground reaction away. We know that's going to move his center of mass over towards his trail side. And then we've got some double peaks happening, some braking forces, some recentering motion, and then some, again, another push underneath that trail foot away from the target to get some action, as we know, that sway action towards target. So I'm going to move to his kind of double there. So we're around 20% here in the first peak. And then we can see that that's very early again. It's before the club's even moved. The brake is being applied underneath his trail foot. And then there is a shift and then a shift back of his pelvis. And then when we get to that all-important kind of final push off the trail foot away from the target to move him towards the target, that 23% there underneath the trail is now going to give him a good shunt towards the target as he moves laterally with his entire body towards the target. So we then have the AP forces. So just going to go into these two forces here. As we see essentially with the all good players, we've got his kind of, I can't stop to them exactly. I'm just going to go here and bring these further on. So we have essentially peak values underneath his trail foot. And we know that this is mid downswing again, top of backswing and impact, mid downswing, the timings, trail foot peaking just a fraction before lead foot. So he's 22% as a force towards the heel, ground reaction towards the toe underneath his trail, moving his right hip forwards, essentially aiding his thrust ability forwards. However, he's 41%, okay, so he's more than double, okay, and I see this in all the fastest players, more than double, toe action forwards, push forwards during in the lead foot to get a ground reaction, double, okay, 41%, which is then going to help him, actually 44% should I say, just shy of 45, actually 44.94. I stand corrected, I'm going to get the right value here, can't see it, it's slightly blurred on the screen. But 45%, let's say, versus 22% of a force which he pushes towards the camera. The ground reaction is away. That's going to really drive and power his hip backwards, okay? That lead hip goes backwards, the right hip goes forwards. He's got this coupling effect, and that merry-go-round of his pelvis is going to then spin open. He's really going to be able to get that pelvis engaged and open into that very, very important open position at impact. So that's very, very interesting. We know we're seeing this common trend here. Commonality is that 1.5 to 2 times more force under the lead foot to essentially power the lead side of the pelvis around and past the golf ball towards target. So we're going to look at the critical events of Martin's vertical forces, okay? So first and foremost, what we understand and what we see and know with all the fast players is how much they unweight. How quick, not how much they go down, how quick they lower themselves and accelerate down towards the ground. It's a short, sharp burst. So Martin is getting to around 50% of his body weight, okay? He's losing half of his body weight because he's free fall down towards the ground. I described that free fall or unweighting. If you took an elevator, a lift right up to floor 100, cut the cables, how quick it goes down, and that peak acceleration down as you cut the cables and release the lift. This is what these fast players are doing. So Martin's getting to this super lightweight state just as he starts his downswing, just into downswing, before he sees a straight vertical movement, because he's getting essentially, as soon as he falls towards the ground, he brakes, he applies force, and then he's going to rise up and get light again. So you are heavy to start, you are light as you start your downswing, and then you are heavy mid downswing, and then you are light into impact, and then you are heavy post impact in your follow through. So we see that there, and Martin is one of the best and one of the fastest weighting and creating clubhead speed ultimately. So we know then that goes up. We see this sharp, steep curve upwards. He gets heavy up to 218. I've seen Martin higher than that when we've worked on his vertical forces. So 2.1 times his body weight. These guys are pretty big guys, pretty heavy guys, super strong. So 2.1 times as a force value into the ground. Essentially anyone over 2 times has got this ability, this massive ability to rise, to jump, to side tilt, and to get that upward, inward and around action of the hands to release that club head forwards going into impact. So they can turn this essentially really, really high hand speed that they create into really high club head speed into impact. Now, that is a really important piece of information for you viewers at home, is that the fastest players are getting peak hand speed around P5, which is just around left arm parallel, lead arm parallel downswing to slightly below it, we see it. And then the hands decel, they slow down into impact because the hand path is being bent in and around, and that's kicking, they're rotating the handle and really accelerating the front of the end of the shaft and the face into the golf ball. So their clubhead speed is reaching peak speed at impact. They're not dragging the handle and leaving the head behind the hands. They're trying to catapult and fling the head forwards into impact. And they do that by rise and side tilt, which then powers the hand path, which then allows them to rotate the grip so they can then accelerate the club head forwards. So this is what we see. And out of that 218 or 2.1 times, he's getting over 140% of that. The vast majority of it coming from his lead foot. And then we know if we get it from the lead foot, that's lead hip rise. The trail hip will go down as the lead hip goes up. That's getting that lead hip higher into impact, essentially powering up through the rib cage, up through the body. So then he can get the hands moving up and in and around. So a great kind of sort of insight there of this super fast player and world champion, and all of these forces timed, the medial-lateral waves, the essential AP forces to help him turn and start to kind of bend into position, how that's kind of double underneath one foot versus the other, how important the lead foot is in that role of creating that action that's going to allow his hip to move back. We know a ton is coming from his lead foot, a huge amount of force into the ground, which is going to help him rise into impact. The laterals, the APs, and then the verticals, all on point for one of the fastest players on the planet. So last but not least, we're going to look at this short 30-yard wedge shot by this player, okay? Okay? So firstly, what we will note, obviously, a very, very muted center of mass trace. Now, this is a very, very short shot. We're generally not seeing any weight shift. If anything, there is a bit of a down towards the ground and certainly an up and away from the ground, but we don't see anything towards trail anywhere near as much, if at all, but we do see some lateral shift towards the target. So, we obviously, the critical events that we see in this medial lateral combined here, right, left force, left, right. So very little going on under the left foot because there's no shift. So we see less than 1% as a value towards the target. So he's not trying to shift away from the target. So very muted. But we will see some force underneath his right foot, breaking the motion of his arms and the club going back, but essentially pushing away from the target to shift towards target. And there's a double peak here because there's some recentering action going on, or leftward action, target side, or towards target action of his pelvis, because there's a little dip before he then moves again towards target. So we see that there again, the lateral forces kicking in first. Then we see the AP forces, which is around 16% and equal around 16 to 18% underneath the lead. So very equal underneath trail, pushing towards the heel, and a toe reaction force getting the trail hip moving forwards. And then we got that same, almost a little bit more, so it is greater, although nowhere near the 1.5 to 2 times that we've seen in other shots underneath the lead, pushing forwards towards 12 o'clock. So we see that then, so the order is lateral, then AP, toe, heel, toe force, peaking at that round kind of downswing. And then straight after, almost identical there, then we're seeing, with all of this, like I said, this kinetic ground reaction force sequence is very much identical in all good players. These are all elite players. These are all professional players, major winners, and good players. So we know that they're doing this sequence of these forces are all in order. They're not mistimed, okay? So then we got the critical events of unweighting. So he's heavy, then light, then heavy again, and then light, and most of it coming from the lead foot. So again, it's pretty much the same story. We're seeing a much more watered down amount of value. So I'm just going to play this through and talk you through the peak amounts just so we can see it. So we're going to play this through 3 times. So medial lateral, let's have a look at that. So what does that peak at? His first peak is around 5.5. His second peak is around 9%. So not a lot of force laterally. He's not moved away from target. He does move a bit towards target, but he doesn't have to break and push his weight across again. As we look at the APs, the 2 points AP here, so we've got around 16 to 20 over 20. So again, that greater force underneath the lead. After that medial lateral, we're getting the AP forces kicking in. And then when we look at verticals, we've got the unweighting value going down to around 85, and then the weighted value, heaviest point, going up to around just short of 150. And most of that is coming from the lead side or lead foot. And I'm just going to bring that back through over there so we can see it. Video is reset back to the beginning. I just want to see how much comes from the, so around 130 coming from his lead foot out of that kind of 150 odd coming out of the vertical forces. 130 is coming out of the lead. So that's what we see. That's the amount of force in a variety of shots, how much force or foot action force these players are applying during different points of their swing, and the ground reaction force for a variety of different shots. So what we see is those values definitely changing in magnitude, a huge amount from iron shots, driver to wedge shots, short shots, massive. We're seeing, you know, some of those forces almost doubling, okay? So we know from a sequence perspective, regardless of shot, the sequence is lateral sway and tilt force, and then AP forces, that ability to thrust, turn, bend motion, and then that vertical force to rise and tilt. So the player is shifting, the player is turning and flexing, the player is rising and tilting. That's what we see in all shots, okay? And we see the timings all the same amongst good players. So to get the message over to you, get your timings right. I'm big on timings. It's what I coach and what I focus on primarily on players first before you inject more force into the system. So get your timings right. Get that kinetic ground reaction force sequence correct, in order. And then once you've got that, you can put force into that right time. And then we know that force precedes motion. Your body will move how you want it to move and how you're being coached to move into impact, and get yourself orientated the correct way to help you deliver the club, and then put it on repeat so you can hit great shots. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, please share, and subscribe to the channel by clicking the bell icon, and then any new video that I post, you will be one of the first to watch it.